Thanksgiving at the Miller estate in Connecticut was always an exercise in survival. But this year, it was quite literally a matter of life and death. When Cynthia Miller slipped a lethal, concentrated dose of a black market abortifacient into a bowl of butternut squash soup, she thought she was solving a family problem. She thought she was permanently erasing the woman she deemed entirely unworthy of her son, and the unborn child she never wanted to acknowledge. But Cynthia made one catastrophic miscalculation. She believed her daughter-in-law was just a meek, desk-bound data analyst. She had no idea she had just poisoned a highly decorated, extensively trained undercover operative for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And Agent Naomi Miller wasn't about to become a victim. The tires of the sleek Range Rover crunched over the pristine white gravel of the Miller family driveway. Naomi Washington Miller rested her hand on her swollen abdomen, feeling the reassuring, rhythmic kicks of her 7-month-old unborn daughter. The sprawling, colonial-style mansion loomed ahead, framed by the skeletal, frost-tipped branches of ancient oak trees. It was a picture of old-money American wealth, but to Naomi it felt like pulling up to a hostile forward operating base. "You okay, babe?" Bradley asked, shifting the car into park. He reached over, his hand covering hers. Bradley Miller was a good man, a successful architect who had fallen head over heels for Naomi 5 years ago in Washington, D.C. He was fiercely protective of her, but he was also terminally blind to the true depth of his mother's malice. "I'm fine, Brad," Naomi said, offering a warm, practiced smile. "Just the usual third trimester backache." Naomi was a black woman from a working-class neighborhood in Baltimore. Bradley was the golden-haired scion of a Connecticut dynasty that proudly traced its lineage back to the Mayflower. From the moment Bradley had introduced them, Cynthia Miller, the family matriarch, had waged a covert, psychological war against Naomi. Cynthia was a master of the passive-aggressive slight. She would make seemingly innocent comments about Naomi's natural hair, or loudly lament how difficult it must be for Naomi to adapt to their world. What Cynthia didn't know was that adapting to different worlds was literally Naomi's profession. To the Miller family, Naomi was a mid-level data analyst for the Department of Justice, a boring, bureaucratic job that required her to stare at spreadsheets all day. In reality, Naomi was a senior special agent with the FBI's Covert Operations Division. She had spent the last 8 years infiltrating organized crime rings, dealing with cartel money launderers, and surviving high-stakes situations that would make Cynthia Miller faint into her Chardonnay. Naomi had been trained at Quantico to read micro-expressions, detect deception, and neutralize threats. Surviving Thanksgiving with her racist mother-in-law was usually just a matter of applying her counterintelligence training to the dinner table. But this year was different. Naomi was pregnant, and her protective instincts were dialed up to a razor-sharp edge. When Bradley opened the heavy oak front door, the scent of roasting turkey, sage, and expensive pine filled the air. Richard Miller, Bradley's father, was sitting in a leather armchair by the roaring fireplace, his face buried in the Wall Street Journal. He offered a vague, polite wave. Then Cynthia appeared. "Bradley, darling," Cynthia cooed, floating down the sweeping mahogany staircase. She was dressed impeccably in cashmere and pearls, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed. She embraced her son, then turned her icy blue eyes to Naomi. Naomi instantly registered a shift in Cynthia's baseline behavior. Usually, Cynthia's greetings toward Naomi involved a stiff, obligatory hug and a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Today, however, Cynthia's pupils were slightly dilated, a physiological sign of adrenaline. Her voice was an octave higher than normal, and her hands fluttered nervously near her collarbone. Naomi, Cynthia said, stepping forward and placing both hands on Naomi's pregnant belly. The intrusion made Naomi's skin crawl, but her training kept her heart rate perfectly steady. Look at you. You are just glowing. I am so thrilled you could make the drive in your delicate condition. Deception, Naomi's brain instantly flagged. Cynthia had spent the last 7 months ignoring the pregnancy entirely, refusing to attend the baby shower, and changing the subject whenever Bradley brought up nursery colours. This sudden, cloying affection was highly anomalous. "Thank you, Cynthia," Naomi replied smoothly, her voice a perfect mirror of polite warmth. "It's wonderful to be here." "I have been preparing for days," Cynthia continued, linking her arm through Bradley's. "I even designed a special menu. Naomi, I know you've had some heartburn and dietary restrictions, so I've prepared a special organic butternut squash soup just for you, made from scratch. It's packed with nutrients for the baby." Naomi smiled, but alarm bells were ringing fiercely in her mind. Cynthia Miller hadn't cooked a meal from scratch in 3 decades. She employed a private chef named Henri. More importantly, Cynthia despised making accommodations for anyone. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Mum." Bradley beamed, completely missing the predatory gleam in his mother's eye. "Only the best for my future grandchild," Cynthia said. Naomi held Cynthia's gaze for a fraction of a second longer than socially normal. Cynthia blinked first, looking away and smoothing down her pristine skirt. It was a classic pacifying behavior. Cynthia was hiding something, and Naomi was going to find out exactly what it was. By noon on Thanksgiving Day, the tension in the house was palpable, at least to Naomi. Bradley was in the den watching football with his father. Cynthia was in the massive, marble-countered kitchen, supposedly putting the finishing touches on the feast. Naomi was upstairs in the guest bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the duvet, her laptop open. Her cover story was that she had to run a quick data patch for work. In reality, she was communicating over a secure, encrypted network with her handler and close friend, Special Agent David Kessler. Naomi. Need a quick background pull. Not official bureau business. Personal. Kessler. You're at the in-laws. Blink twice if you need a SWAT extraction. Naomi. Funny. Look up a Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Upper East Side, Manhattan. Naomi had spotted the name earlier that morning. She had gone down to the kitchen for a glass of water before sunrise. Cynthia's designer handbag had been sitting on the island, carelessly unclasped. Inside, Naomi had spotted a folded receipt from a private clinic in New York. A quick, covert glance revealed Pendleton's name and a charge for $5,000 for holistic consultation and herbal compounds. Kessler, give me a minute. Naomi closed her eyes and took a deep, centering breath. Her tactical patience was being tested. She felt another strong kick against her ribs. "I've got you, baby girl," she thought fiercely. "Nobody is going to hurt you." Her encrypted messaging app chimed. Kessler. Naomi, where did you get this name? Pendleton had his medical license revoked 5 years ago. He runs an underground clinic. He's been investigated twice for providing illegal, unregulated abortifacients and heavy metal toxicity masquerading as herbal cleanses to wealthy clients who want off-the-books medical solutions. The blood rushed in Naomi's ears, a cold, hard fury taking over her body. She stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle snapping violently into place. Cynthia's sudden interest in her diet, the special soup made from scratch, the $5,000 off-the-books clinic visit. Cynthia wasn't just trying to make Naomi sick. She was actively attempting to induce a late-term miscarriage. She was trying to kill Naomi's baby. Naomi. Keep this quiet, Dave. I'll handle it. Kessler. Naomi. Talk to me. Are you in danger? Naomi. Not anymore. Now they are. Naomi closed the laptop. The quiet, polite daughter-in-law was gone. The apex predator had just entered the building. She slipped out of the guest room and padded silently down the carpeted stairs. Her footsteps were completely soundless, a skill honed from years of clearing hostile buildings. She paused just outside the kitchen archway, pressing her back against the wall, listening. She heard the soft clinking of a spoon against china. Peeking around the corner, she saw Cynthia standing by the stove. A single, elegant white porcelain bowl sat on the granite counter. Cynthia reached into the pocket of her cashmere cardigan and pulled out a small, amber glass vial. Naomi watched, her eyes tracking every micro-movement as Cynthia unscrewed the dropper. Cynthia's hand was shaking slightly. She squeezed 5 drops of a dark, viscous liquid into the butternut squash soup. She quickly stirred it in, the liquid disappearing flawlessly into the thick orange puree. Cynthia then shoved the vial deep into the bottom of the kitchen trash can, buried under a pile of wet coffee grounds and potato peels. Perfect, Cynthia whispered to herself, a cruel, satisfied smirk crossing her lips. Naomi pulled back into the hallway shadows. The rage burning inside her was apocalyptic, but she compartmentalized it, locking it away in a psychological box. Confronting Cynthia now would result in a messy he said, she said. Cynthia would claim it was just a harmless herbal supplement, a vitamin boost. She would cry, play the victim, and Bradley would be caught in the middle. No. Naomi needed undeniable, ironclad proof. She needed to let Cynthia spring her own trap. Naomi waited until Cynthia walked into the formal dining room to arrange the centerpieces. Moving with lethal speed, Naomi entered the kitchen. She bypassed the soup entirely and went straight to the trash can. Wearing a latex glove she had slipped from her bag upstairs, she dug through the coffee grounds and retrieved the amber vial. She dropped it into an evidence baggie she kept in her purse, zipping it into an inner pocket. Next, she took a clean spoon, dipped it into the tainted soup, and carefully transferred a small sample into a secondary, sterile plastic vial she used for field testing. Just as she screwed the cap on, the kitchen door swung open. "Oh!" Cynthia gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Naomi, you startled me. I thought you were resting." Naomi turned around, offering a smile so warm and relaxed it was terrifying. "I just came down to see if you needed help, Cynthia. It smells absolutely divine in here." Cynthia's eyes darted to the bowl of soup, then back to Naomi, relaxing when she saw Naomi standing a few feet away, seemingly oblivious. "No help needed, dear. Everything is ready. Why don't you go tell Bradley and Richard that dinner is served?" "Of course," Naomi said smoothly. She walked past Cynthia, stopping just an inch from the older woman's shoulder. "I am so looking forward to this meal, you have no idea." Cynthia smiled, a tight, triumphant expression. "I made it just for you, Naomi. I promise. It's a meal you will never forget." "I'm counting on it," Naomi replied. As Naomi walked toward the den to fetch her husband, she tapped her pocket, feeling the hard plastic of the evidence vial. The trap was set. Now, it was time to let the matriarch of the Miller family dig her own grave in front of an audience. The formal dining room of the Miller estate was a testament to generational wealth designed to intimidate outsiders. A massive crystal chandelier cast a warm, fractured glow over the long mahogany table, which was set with antique silver cutlery, hand-painted china, and a sprawling centerpiece of autumnal foliage and white roses. A fire crackled merrily in the marble hearth, though the room felt entirely devoid of genuine warmth. Richard Miller sat at the head of the table, already pouring himself a generous glass of a 2012 vintage Pinot Noir. Bradley sat to his right, loosened his tie, and smiled across the table at Naomi. "Everything looks incredible, Mom," Bradley said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Only the best," Cynthia replied, emerging from the swinging kitchen doors. She was carrying a silver tray holding 4 bowls of soup. 3 of the bowls contained a creamy bisque garnished with fresh chives. The 4th bowl, slightly larger and featuring a different floral pattern on the rim, contained the vibrant orange butternut squash puree. Naomi's eyes tracked the bowl as Cynthia gracefully set it down in front of her. The steam rising from the orange liquid smelled of roasted squash, nutmeg, and a faint, almost imperceptible metallic undertone. To a civilian, it was just Thanksgiving dinner. To Naomi, it was an active crime scene. "Thank you, Cynthia," Naomi said, her voice perfectly modulated. She unfolded her heavy linen napkin and draped it over her lap, her right hand brushing against the hard outline of her FBI credentials, securely tucked into the inner pocket of her tailored maternity blazer. "Eat up, dear," Cynthia urged, taking her own seat opposite Naomi. "It's best when it's piping hot. It has all the vitamins you and the baby need to thrive." Naomi picked up her silver spoon. She let the silence stretch for 3 full seconds. In interrogation training at Quantico, silence was a weapon. It forced the subject's brain to fill the void, often with their own anxiety. She watched Cynthia. Cynthia's eyes were fixed on the spoon. Her breathing was shallow. She was anticipating the strike. Instead of dipping the spoon into the soup, Naomi rested it on the edge of the matching saucer. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands over her stomach. "You know, Cynthia," Naomi began, her tone conversational, but carrying resonance. "I was actually doing some reading this morning about alternative medicine, the things people will ingest to cure what ails them." Cynthia's polite smile froze. The corners of her mouth tightened. "Oh, how interesting. But let's not talk about medical things at the dinner table, Naomi. It's unappetizing." "I think it's fascinating," Naomi pressed on, her eyes locking onto her mother-in-law's. She deliberately ignored Bradley's slightly confused expression. "For instance, I was reading about the underground market for unlicensed holistic practitioners, people who operate out of the Upper East Side, catering to wealthy clients who want discreet, off-the-book solutions to their problems." The crystal goblet in Cynthia's hand trembled. A single drop of red wine splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a blood stain. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Cynthia said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "Please, eat your soup before it gets cold." "There's a doctor I read about," Naomi continued, her voice lowering into a calm, rhythmic cadence that handlers use to de-escalate hostage-takers or corner suspects. "A Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Have you ever heard of him, Cynthia?" Richard looked up from his plate, his thick white eyebrows furrowing. "Pendleton? The name sounds familiar. Didn't the Peterson family use him for something years ago?" "Richard, please," Cynthia snapped, a genuine crack of panic breaking through her polished veneer. "Naomi is just rambling. Pregnancy hormones, I'm sure. They make the mind wander." "He lost his medical license 5 years ago," Naomi stated, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the table. The apex predator was circling. He lost it because he was synthesizing highly concentrated, unregulated abortifacients, heavy metal compounds and toxic herbal derivatives. He sells them in small, amber glass vials. The silence in the dining room was absolute, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Bradley looked back and forth between his wife and his mother. "Naomi, babe, what are you talking about? Why are we talking about this?" "Because," Naomi said, never breaking eye contact with Cynthia, Your mother paid Dr. Pendleton $5,000 in cash 3 days ago, and about 20 minutes ago, I watched her empty one of his amber vials into this exact bowl of soup. That is an outrageous lie, Cynthia shrieked, slamming her hands down on the mahogany table. The silverware rattled violently. Her face, usually a picture of aristocratic composure, was flushed a mottled, ugly red. How dare you? You come into my home, sit at my table, and accuse me of attempted murder, Naomi supplied helpfully, her voice deadly calm. Naomi, Bradley shouted, standing up from his chair. He looked horrified, his hands running through his golden hair. What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? My mother would never. Sit down, Bradley, Naomi ordered. It wasn't the voice of his loving wife. It was the voice of a federal agent commanding a civilian in a volatile situation. The sheer authority in her tone made Bradley freeze, his knees hitting the edge of his chair before he slowly sank back down. You're hysterical, Cynthia spat, looking at her husband for support. Richard, do something. She's clearly having some sort of psychotic break. I knew she wasn't stable. I told you she wasn't right for this family. Richard cleared his throat, puffing out his chest. Now see here, young lady. I don't know what kind of sick joke this is, but you will apologize to my wife immediately, or you can pack your bags and leave. Naomi didn't flinch. She slowly reached into the inner pocket of her blazer. For the last 5 years, you've known me as a data analyst for the Department of Justice, Naomi said, her voice ringing clear and hard off the crystal and china. That was a cover, a necessary fiction to protect my work, and frankly, to protect my family. She pulled out a sleek, black leather wallet. With a flick of her wrist, it flipped open, revealing a gleaming gold shield and a federal identification card. She tossed it onto the center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. Special Agent Naomi Washington Miller, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Covert Operations Division, Naomi announced. Bradley stared at the gold shield, his jaw slack. The color drained completely from his face. FBI? Naomi. What? I don't just look at spreadsheets, Brat. I spend my life dealing with cartel fixers, extortionists, and sociopaths who think their money makes them invincible, Naomi said, her eyes shifting back to Cynthia, who was now staring at the badge as if it were a venomous snake. Which means, Cynthia, you brought a butter knife to a gunfight. It's a fake, Cynthia whispered, her voice trembling. She bought it online. She's crazy. Naomi calmly reached into the side pocket of her maternity trousers and produced a thick, clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, the small amber vial with the dropper sat perfectly preserved. She tossed it onto the table next to the badge. I retrieved this from your kitchen trash can, buried under the coffee grounds, Naomi said, detailing the physical evidence with clinical precision. It's secured. I also took a sample of the soup you just served me. Both are going straight to the FBI forensics lab at Quantico. They will run a mass spectrometry analysis. They will find Dr. Pendleton's exact chemical signature. They will pull his client logs, and they will find your name. Cynthia was hyperventilating now, her chest heaving beneath her cashmere cardigan. You hated me from the day Brad brought me home, Naomi continued, her voice dropping into a register of pure, cold steel. You hated my skin color, you hated my background, and you hated that you couldn't control me. I tolerated your passive-aggressive insults because I love your son. But you crossed a line today. You tried to murder my child. No, Cynthia sobbed, tears finally spilling over her mascara. No, it wasn't. It wasn't poison. It was just a cleanse. Pendleton said it would just induce a natural flush. It was for the best, Bradley. She's ruining your life. The confession hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Bradley looked at his mother, genuine revulsion twisting his features. "You tried to kill my baby?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "My daughter. She doesn't belong with us," Cynthia screamed, pointing a shaking finger at Naomi. "She is infecting our bloodline. I was trying to save you, Bradley." "Save him?" Naomi stood up. Even at 7 months pregnant, she radiated lethal, imposing energy. She walked slowly around the table, stopping right behind Cynthia's chair. Cynthia shrank away from her, terrified. Naomi leaned down, her lips inches from her mother-in-law's ear. "Here is what is going to happen," Naomi whispered softly, so only Cynthia and Bradley could hear. "I am going to take my husband, and we are going to walk out that front door. You are going to remain in this house. If you ever attempt to contact Bradley, me, or my daughter again, I will have Special Agent Kessler arrive at this house with a federal warrant. I will have you arrested for attempted fetal homicide, and I will personally ensure you are placed in a federal holding facility where your money and your country club memberships mean absolutely nothing." Naomi straightened up, looking at her husband. "Brad, we're leaving." Bradley didn't hesitate. He stood up, looking at his mother as if she were a stranger. "You are dead to me, Mom. Don't ever call me again." As they walked out of the dining room, leaving Richard sitting in stunned, horrified silence, and Cynthia weeping hysterically into her hands, Naomi paused by the table. She picked up her FBI badge and the evidence bag, slipping them back into her pockets. She had survived Thanksgiving, and she had neutralized the threat. The apex predator had protected her cub. The heavy oak doors of the Miller estate slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the frigid Connecticut air. A light, stinging snow had begun to fall, dusting the pristine gravel driveway in a layer of white. Bradley walked like a man heavily concussed. He stumbled twice before reaching the passenger side of the sleek Range Rover, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't grasp the chrome door handle. Naomi bypassed the passenger side, her tactical training completely overriding her physical exhaustion. She gently but firmly pushed Bradley aside, opened the passenger door, and guided him into the leather seat. She slammed the door, marched around the hood of the SUV, and slid into the driver's seat. The moment the heavy doors sealed them inside the soundproofed cabin, the silence became suffocating. Bradley pressed his face into his hands, his breath coming in jagged, ragged gasps. He was hyperventilating, the shock of the last 20 minutes finally shattering his psychological defenses. His mother, a pillar of high society, had attempted to poison his pregnant wife. His wife, a quiet data analyst, was a federal undercover agent. His entire reality had been ripped out from under him. Naomi didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, she turned in her seat, her posture shifting from the rigid, commanding stance of an FBI agent back to the grounded, empathetic presence of a wife. But the operational awareness remained. She locked the doors and activated the vehicle's secondary security system. "Brad," Naomi said softly, her voice pitched to the exact frequency she used in crisis negotiation, calm, anchoring, and undeniably present. "Brad, look at me." He shook his head, his fingers digging into his golden hair. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who my mother is. I don't know what just happened in there." "Look at me," she repeated, placing a warm hand on his knee. The physical contact made him flinch slightly, but then he slowly lifted his head. His blue eyes were bloodshot, swimming with tears and profound betrayal. "I am Naomi," she said, holding his gaze with absolute, unwavering intensity. "I am your wife. I am the woman who burns toast every Sunday. I am the woman who steals all the blankets. I am the mother of the little girl kicking my ribs right now. Nothing about us is a lie. Do you hear me? Everything between you and me is real." "You're an FBI agent," Bradley choked out, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "You told me you ran spreadsheets for the DOJ. You told me your trips to Miami and Chicago were for software integration." Naomi sighed, a heavy, tired sound. She leaned back against the headrest, her hand resting instinctively on her swollen belly. "My official designation is Senior Special Agent, Covert Operations, Division 6. When I met you, Brad, I was 18 months deep into an undercover op dismantling the financial wing of the Moretti crime syndicate. I couldn't tell you the truth. It wasn't just bureau protocol. It was about keeping you alive. If my cover was blown, anyone attached to me became collateral damage." Bradley stared at her, the reality of her words sinking in. "And the last 5 years? I transitioned to a handler role when we got married, managing field operatives," Naomi explained, her tone clinical but laced with regret. "I still run classified operations. I wanted to tell you. Every single day, I wanted to tell you. But the threat matrix, and then I got pregnant. I was planning to take a desk transfer after my maternity leave and read you in on everything. I never wanted it to come out like this." Bradley looked out the window at the snow falling on his childhood home. The warm lights glowing from the dining room window now looked sinister, like the eyes of a predator in the dark. "My mother," Bradley whispered, his voice breaking. "She tried to kill our baby. Why? Because you're black? Because you're from Baltimore? Because she's a monstrous, elitist snob?" "All of the above," Naomi said flatly, her professional detachment returning. "She views me as a genetic and social contagion. She couldn't convince you to leave me, so she opted for a permanent, deniable solution. Dr. Pendleton's compounds are designed to mimic a natural, spontaneous late-term miscarriage. If she had succeeded, there would have been no police investigation, just a tragic family loss." Bradley let out a sound that was half sob, half scream, punching the leather dashboard with a closed fist. The sheer agony of a son realizing his mother's true capacity for evil was a terrible thing to witness. Naomi let him feel it. She didn't offer platitudes. She let the anger burn through the shock. "What happens now?" Bradley finally asked, wiping his face with the back of his hand. He looked at her, not just as his wife, but as the professional she had just revealed herself to be. "Do you arrest her? Does this go to trial? It'll be a media circus. The Miller family name." "To hell with the family name," Naomi said coldly. She reached into her blazer, pulled out her encrypted, government-issued smartphone, and placed it on the center console. "But you're right about a trial, a high-profile attempted fetal homicide case against a Connecticut socialite. The defense attorneys would drag me through the mud. They would subpoena my operational history. It would jeopardize active federal investigations and put my informants at risk. I won't allow that, and I won't put you through a public spectacle." Naomi pressed a button on the steering wheel, firing up the engine. The Range Rover roared to life, the heater blasting warm air into the freezing cabin. She shifted into drive, and the tires crunched over the snow, leaving the estate behind without a backward glance. "So she gets away with it?" Bradley asked, his voice hardening with sudden protective rage. "Nobody gets away with trying to harm my family," Naomi said, her eyes fixed on the dark, winding road ahead. She tapped the screen of her encrypted phone, dialing a secure line. "I'm going to dismantle her life, Bradley, but I'm going to do it quietly. I'm going to cut off her resources, isolate her, and leave her with nothing but the four walls of that empty house. But first, we take down the man who gave her the weapon." The line clicked and connected. "Kessler," a gruff voice answered on the other end. "Dave, it's Naomi," she said, her voice dropping into a rapid, authoritative clip. "Code Black. I have physical evidence of a Schedule 1 toxicity attempt. Suspect is Cynthia Miller. Supplier is Dr. Arthur Pendleton. I need a tactical team mobilized to Pendleton's Upper East Side clinic immediately. Do not wait for a morning warrant. Get a judge on the phone right now, citing exigent circumstances. He knows the heat is on, and he will try to burn his ledger." "Jesus, Naomi, are you and the baby okay?" Special Agent David Kessler's voice was instantly stripped of its usual bureaucratic weariness, replaced by sharp, lethal focus. "We are intact, but I want Pendleton in federal custody by midnight. Tear his clinic apart." "Consider it done," Kessler replied. "I'm rolling out with the HRT unit now." Naomi disconnected the call. She drove through the blinding snow, the golden shield heavy in her pocket, the amber vial resting in the evidence bag beside her. The Thanksgiving dinner was over, but the hunt had just begun. At 11:15 p.m., the affluent, quiet serenity of Manhattan's Upper East Side was shattered by the screech of tires. 4 unmarked black Chevy Suburbans abruptly boxed in a pristine, narrow brownstone on East 73rd Street. The building had no signage, just heavy iron grills over the windows and a polished brass doorknob. To the casual observer, it was a multi-million-dollar private residence. To the FBI's hostage rescue and tactical team, it was a high-value target. Special Agent David Kessler stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 40s, wearing a Kevlar vest emblazoned with the yellow FBI letters over a dark windbreaker. "Breach and clear," Kessler ordered softly into his comms unit. "Secure all electronics and biological materials. Target is Dr. Arthur Pendleton. Let's move." 10 heavily armed agents stacked up against the mahogany front door. A heavy kinetic battering ram swung forward in a single devastating arc. The reinforced door splintered and gave way with a deafening crash. "FBI, federal agents, show me your hands." The tactical team flooded the foyer, sweeping through the opulent reception area. Persian rugs and antique oil paintings lined the walls, a stark contrast to the tactical boots stomping across the hardwood floors. Kessler followed the team in, his sidearm drawn. "Clear the upper floors. I want the basement." Down a hidden flight of stairs disguised behind a false bookcase in the library, Kessler and 3 agents found the real clinic. The air smelled sharply of bleach, sulfur, and metallic compounds. It looked less like a medical facility and more like a clandestine narcotics laboratory. Stainless steel tables were covered in beakers, centrifuges, and rows of small, empty amber vials, identical to the one Naomi had secured in Connecticut. At the back of the room, a tall, gaunt man with silver hair was frantically pouring a vat of dark liquid down an industrial sink while feeding a stack of leather-bound notebooks into a heavy-duty cross-cut shredder. "Pendleton, step away from the sink and put your hands on your head," Kessler barked, closing the distance in 3 long strides. Dr. Arthur Pendleton froze, the vat slipping from his latex-gloved hands and shattering on the tiled floor. He turned around, his eyes wide with panic. "This is a private residence. You have no right." 2 agents tackled him to the floor before he could finish the sentence, efficiently zip-tying his wrists behind his back. Kessler ignored the doctor, diving toward the shredder. He hit the emergency kill switch, stopping the blades just before they chewed through a thick, red, leather-bound book. He carefully pulled the book free. It was Pendleton's physical client ledger, the master copy he didn't dare put on a digital server. "Get Hazmat down here to process these chemicals," Kessler ordered, bagging the ledger in clear evidence plastic. He looked down at the cowering doctor. Arthur Pendleton, you are under arrest for the illegal manufacture and distribution of controlled toxic substances, conspiracy to commit fetal homicide, and a litany of federal health violations. You have the right to remain silent, which I highly suggest you utilize, because you are in a catastrophic amount of trouble. 2 hours later, Kessler was standing in the Mobile Command Center, parked on Lexington Avenue, the red ledger open on a steel table under a bright halogen lamp. He had Naomi on a secure video link. Naomi was sitting at the kitchen island of her own townhouse in Washington, D.C., a cup of decaf tea in her hand, Bradley asleep on the couch behind her, exhausted from the emotional trauma. "We bagged him, Naomi," Kessler said, rubbing his tired eyes. "The lab boys are already testing the residue in the basement. Preliminary mass spec confirms a highly concentrated heavy metal abortifacient cocktail, bismuth, arsenic, and an unlicensed uterine contraction stimulant. It's exactly what was in the soup." Naomi's jaw tightened, a cold fury flashing in her dark eyes. "And the ledger?" Kessler flipped the heavy pages. The entries were meticulously coded, but not well enough to fool a federal forensic accountant. It's a gold mine. Politicians, Wall Street executives, socialites, people paying 50 grand in cash for discreet problem solving. And, Kessler paused, running his finger down a column dated November 18th. "And Cynthia Miller," Naomi finished for him. "Yes," Kessler confirmed. "But there's a complication, Naomi. The payment didn't come from Cynthia's personal accounts. It was on wire transfer routed through a shell LLC in the Cayman Islands, a shell company wholly owned by the Miller Family Trust." Naomi sat up straighter. "Richard's trust?" "Exactly," Kessler said. "Which means either Richard Miller authorized the payment to buy the poison, or Cynthia committed wire fraud and embezzled from her husband's trust to do it. Either way, if this goes public, the IRS, the SEC, and the DOJ are going to freeze every asset the Miller family has. They will be destitute." Naomi looked back at her husband, sleeping fitfully on the sofa. Bradley had walked away from his family, but Naomi knew the total public destruction of his father's legacy would crush him. "No public spectacle, Dave," Naomi said, her voice resolute. "We handle this the way we handled the Moretti capos, who were too useful to jail." Kessler raised an eyebrow. "You want to leverage them?" "I want absolute control," Naomi corrected. "Pendleton is going to federal prison for the rest of his life. Let the Southern District of New York handle him. But keep the Miller name out of the official indictments. Seal that page of the ledger. Classify it under active counterintelligence operations." "Naomi, I can't just bury evidence of attempted murder. The director—" "I'm not burying it," Naomi interrupted, her eyes cold and calculating. "I'm weaponizing it. I will personally visit Cynthia and Richard Miller tomorrow. I'm going to show them the wire transfer fraud, the attempted murder charge, and the impending asset freeze. And then I am going to offer them a choice." "Which is?" Kessler asked. "They sign over full, irrevocable control of the Miller Family Trust to an independent conservatorship managed by Bradley," Naomi stated smoothly. "They step down from every board, every charity, and every country club. They sign a legally binding non-disclosure agreement and a permanent restraining order regarding me and my daughter. If they breathe a word of this, or if they ever approach my child, the sealed indictment gets unsealed, and they spend their twilight years in a federal penitentiary." Kessler stared at the screen for a long moment, a slow, impressed smile spreading across his face. "You know, Washington, Sometimes you terrify me." "I protect what's mine, Dave," Naomi said quietly, placing a hand on her stomach. "I'll see you tomorrow." She ended the call, the screen going black. She looked around her quiet, safe home. The threat was neutralized. The enemy was surrounded. Tomorrow, Naomi Washington Miller wasn't just going to defeat her mother-in-law. She was going to erase her from the chessboard entirely. At 9 o'clock the following Monday morning, a black, government-issued Chevrolet Tahoe pulled through the wrought iron gates of the Miller estate. The snow from Thanksgiving had melted into a grey, muddy slush, perfectly matching the bleak atmosphere hanging over the sprawling Connecticut property. Naomi stepped out of the SUV. She was no longer wearing the soft, accommodating maternity clothes of a polite daughter-in-law. She wore a tailored charcoal grey tactical blazer over a black turtleneck, her gold FBI shield clipped visibly to her belt next to her holstered Glock 19. She looked exactly like what she was, a senior federal agent arriving to execute a hostile takeover. Special Agent David Kessler flanked her, carrying a thick, locked leather briefcase. They walked up the sweeping front steps and bypassed the doorbell entirely. Naomi pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the foyer. "Richard, Cynthia," in the study. "Now!" Naomi's voice echoed through the silent mansion, carrying the sharp, non-negotiable bark of law enforcement command. Within moments, Richard Miller appeared at the top of the staircase, wearing a silk dressing gown, his face flushed with indignation. Cynthia trailed behind him, looking like a hollowed-out shell of the woman she had been 4 days ago. Her hair was unkempt, and her eyes were swollen and rimmed with dark, bruised shadows. "How dare you break into my home?" Richard snarled, marching down the stairs. "I have my attorney, Peter Sterling, on speed dial. You are trespassing, and I will have your badge for this little stunt." "Call him," Naomi said coolly, stepping into the wood-paneled study and taking a seat at the head of Richard's massive mahogany desk. She gestured to the leather chairs opposite her. "In fact, put Mr. Sterling on speakerphone. He's going to want to hear this, especially before the SEC freezes his retainer." Richard hesitated, unnerved by her absolute confidence. He pulled out his phone, dialed, and placed it on the desk. "Peter, it's Richard. My daughter-in-law is here, claiming to be federal law enforcement. I want her removed." "Mr. Sterling?" Naomi interrupted, leaning toward the phone. "This is Senior Special Agent Naomi Washington Miller, FBI Covert Operations Division 6. I am sitting here with Special Agent David Kessler. We are currently holding physical and digital evidence of a Class C felony under 18 U.S.C. Section 1841, the Unborn Victims of Violence Act, as well as federal wire fraud and conspiracy to distribute Schedule I toxic substances." The line went dead silent. "Agent Washington Miller," the lawyer's voice came back, entirely stripped of its usual corporate arrogance. "What exactly is the nature of this evidence?" Kessler opened the briefcase. He pulled out 3 glossy, high-resolution photographs and slid them across the desk. The first was a picture of Dr. Arthur Pendleton in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. The second was a blown-up image of the red leather ledger, clearly showing Cynthia's name next to a $5,000 transaction for Compound 4 termination. The third photograph made Richard Miller the color of chalk. It was a printed wire transfer receipt. "On November 18th, Naomi stated, her eyes locked on Richard. A wire transfer of $5,000 was initiated from a Cayman Islands shell, LLC. That LLC is a subsidiary of the Miller Family Trust, of which you, Richard, are the sole signatory. The funds were deposited directly into an offshore account controlled by Arthur Pendleton to purchase a lethal heavy metal abortifacient. "I didn't authorize that," Richard bellowed, slamming his fist on the desk. "I don't know anything about a clinic. Cynthia handles the discretionary household accounts." "Legally, Mr. Miller, it doesn't matter," Kessler chimed in, his voice heavy with bureaucratic finality. "Your trust funded an attempted murder. That makes you an accessory before the fact. Under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, the Department of Justice is fully authorized to seize the entire Miller family trust, freeze your domestic assets, and indict you both by Friday." "Cynthia," Richard whispered, turning slowly to look at his wife. The look of disgust and hatred on his face was absolute. "What did you do? You used my trust. You risked my company for this." Cynthia began to weep violently, covering her face with her shaking hands. "I just wanted her gone, Richard. I just wanted her out of our lives. I didn't know it would trace back." "You stupid, arrogant woman," Richard hissed. He turned back to Naomi, his previous bluster entirely gone. He was a cornered animal. "What do you want? Money? A divorce settlement for Bradley? Name your price. Just keep the feds out of my accounts." Naomi stood up. She looked at the two of them, the architects of so much quiet cruelty, now reduced to terrified, pathetic figures. "I don't want your money, Richard," Naomi said, her voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. "I want your empire." Kessler pulled a thick stack of legal documents from the briefcase and set them on the desk, right next to the wire transfer photos. "These are irrevocable conservatorship documents, drawn up by the Attorney General's office," Naomi explained. "You and Cynthia are going to sign them right now. You are transferring full, absolute control of the Miller Family Trust, all subsidiary LLCs, and the family estate to Bradley. You are resigning from the board of your company. Cynthia is resigning from the country club, the historical society, and every charity board she sits on." Richard stared at the papers as if they were dipped in acid. "You're stripping me of everything. You're taking my life's work." "I'm giving you a choice," Naomi corrected sharply. "Sign the papers, live quietly on a fixed stipend that Bradley will manage, and you stay out of a federal penitentiary. Or you refuse, and Agent Kessler reads you both your Miranda rights right now." "Dr. Pendleton is already singing to the district attorney in the Southern District of New York. He gave us everything." "Peter," Richard pleaded to the phone, "tell them they can't do this." "Richard," the lawyer said, his voice grim, "if they have the wire transfers tied to the trust and the doctor is cooperating, sign the papers. If the DOJ gets involved, I can't protect you. You'll die in prison." The silence in the study was absolute, save for Cynthia's ragged sobbing. Richard Miller, the patriarch of a Connecticut dynasty, picked up the solid gold Montblanc pen from his desk. His hand trembled so violently he could barely grip it. He signed his name on the dotted lines, legally erasing himself from the empire he had spent 50 years building. He slid the papers toward Cynthia. She didn't even read them. She just signed, tears staining the heavy parchment. "There's one more thing," Naomi said, picking up the signed documents and handing them to Kessler. She pulled a single sheet of paper from her own jacket. "This is a permanent federal restraining order. You are never to contact Bradley, me, or my daughter. You will not call, you will not write, and you will not approach us. If you violate this order, the sealed indictment gets unsealed. Do you understand?" "Yes," Richard choked out, his eyes glued to the floor. Naomi didn't wait for Cynthia to answer. She turned on her heel and walked out of the study, the heavy tactical boots echoing on the hardwood. She had come into the lion's den, and she had pulled the teeth from the beasts. 3 months later, the sterile, bright lights of the Washington, D.C. Memorial Hospital delivery ward shone down on a scene of pure, exhausted joy. Naomi lay back against the hospital pillows, her dark skin glowing with a thin sheen of sweat, a triumphant, radiant smile spreading across her face. In her arms, wrapped in a pink and blue striped blanket, was a perfectly healthy 7-pound baby girl. Bradley sat beside the bed, still wearing his scrubs, tears streaming freely down his face. He leaned down, kissing Naomi's forehead, then gently kissed the tiny sleeping forehead of his daughter. "She's perfect," Bradley whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "She's absolutely perfect, Naomi." "She's a survivor," Naomi murmured, brushing a tiny curl of dark hair from the baby's forehead. "Just like her mum." They had named her Maya. She would grow up surrounded by love, shielded by a father who had chosen his true family, and protected by a mother who knew exactly how to keep the monsters at bay. Bradley hadn't spoken to his parents since Thanksgiving. He had taken control of the trust, liquidated the toxic assets, and set up a massive college fund for Maya. The Connecticut estate had been quietly sold, and Richard and Cynthia had moved into a small, anonymous condo in Florida, terrified of their own shadows. Naomi looked down at Maya, feeling the familiar, protective weight of her Glock secured in the lockbox in her hospital closet, and the even heavier, warmer weight of the love in the room. The covert operative had completed her most important mission. The file on Dr. Arthur Pendleton was sealed in the archives of the Southern District of New York, a silent testament to a tragedy averted. Cynthia and Richard Miller became ghosts in Connecticut, trapped in a gilded cage of their own making, stripped of their wealth, their social standing, and the son they had tried to manipulate. They traded their freedom for their silence, forever exiled from the family they sought to control. In a sunlit nursery in Washington, D.C., Naomi watched Bradley rock their newborn daughter, Maya, to sleep. The trauma of that Thanksgiving would always linger as a cold shadow, but it had forged an unbreakable bond between husband and wife. Naomi Washington Miller had spent her career dismantling criminal empires in the dark, but her greatest victory was stepping into the light to protect the only empire that truly mattered: her family.